All right. Welcome back, everybody. I apologize. That was, for the record, Vice Chair Young's fault entirely. And just want the record to show that.
Confirmed.
All right, let's get back going again. I know we've got a couple of items remaining here, and I believe we are on to agenda item number 12. This is Heritage Meeting Report and Emergency Bighorn Sheep Capture and Water Hauling in Southern Nevada. This is for possible action. Heritage Account Principal Proposal. Committee Chair Tom Barnes, Game Division Administrator Sean Espinoza, and Habitat Division Administrator Mark Freese. Commission will hear a report from the Heritage Committee and consider the emergency bighorn sheep capture and water hauling in Southern Nevada. Heritage Account Principal Proposal. The department is seeking Heritage Account Principal Project funding in the amount of $500,000 to assist with the emergency bighorn sheep captures and water hauling in Southern Nevada. So, yes, as we see, Mr. Barnes, Chairman Barnes, unfortunately is not here, but Commissioner Walther.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So prior to lunch, we had Joe's presentation. We met on Tuesday as a committee, and Joe and Mike in the department presented largely the same information in that report. This was a lot more detailed today, but ultimately the committee did anonymously approve or recommend to approve the funding.
All right, perfect. Any questions at all from the commission regards? Yes, Commissioner McNinch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was a rather lengthy letter that was written by the Eureka County Board of Commissioners, and I know that Commissioner Cavilla had asked about it a little bit, and it's hard to summarize what's in that. So if I could ask the department, I think it's worth and important to kind of talk about that for just a minute and how this project might line up with some of those concerns or unalign or whatever the case might be. There was talk of NEPA, and they were talking NEPA, and if somebody could address that real quick, I think it's important to recognize that that letter was out there.
So thank you for the record, Alan Janae. So yes, Eureka County sent a letter. I don't have it in front of me, but I've read it enough times. I've got a fair summary. And so that was in response to a categorical exclusion for the release of these bighorns into the Cortez Mountains. They identified various issues. We have had a follow-up meeting with BLM just to basically say that they are evaluating that letter and trying to check all of the references made by Eureka County. So I would say at this point there is, I can't confirm or deny how BLM's going to deal with that letter. They're doing their investigation right now and follow up to that letter. So we'll be waiting to hear back from BLM. There is a Eureka County Natural Resource NRAC meeting coming this following week, and we will have some attendance at that. They will be discussing Cortez sheep release again, and what we've put forward is cooperative agreements with each of the sheep permittees, and we've heard positive feedback from them about the idea of cooperative agreements, and so there is a potential there of solving some of that issue, and some of those concerns in Eureka County's letter can be covered as far as some of the RMP revisions, things like that were very far-reaching. I would say that BLM is still assessing that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Alan. Basically, department's not ignoring the issues of concern. They're being addressed. There's conversations occurring. And, you know, I think that's kind of what I was wanting to get on the record is that this isn't we're ignoring you and doing whatever type of situation. There's a lot going on, and RMPs are a whole different thing. I mean, those are, like you said, if we relied on having everything in an RMP, we'd never get anything done. So, okay, thank you.
If I just may add, yeah, as I mentioned, we have met with every one of the permittees with the domestic sheep permits. We have met with them, discussed this, and we do have what I would say is generalized positive feedback about cooperative agreements, but also Deputy Director Caleb McAdoo couldn't be here today. He's actually at another meeting, but he did host a meeting with the locals of Pine Valley. I think it was a week ago, Thursday. He met with them and had a very good exchange with them. Again, trying to make sure that we're hearing their concerns and trying to address their concerns. And so it's been a very hands-on process. The department's done a lot of work. And I would turn to Scott Roberts, Regional Game Supervisor, to see if there was anything more he thought might be meaningful to add. He's been involved in many of these discussions, as you can imagine, being the Eastern Region Supervisor.
Game Supervisor. As Alan was saying, we've had 3 special cab meetings with Lander, Eureka, or I guess Eureka's was just a regularly scheduled, and Elko to present and report on this. We were on the Eureka County Commission agenda. We went, had a very good meeting. Ironically, they voted to support it. We presented to the Elko County Commission. There was more questions coming out of that. They were gonna present, I think they called it I don't remember the exact term. It was neither in support or in opposition. It was just a letter of concern, making sure that we were checking all those boxes before moving forward. As Alan also mentioned, we met with the affected permittees and the local landowners in Pine Valley. It was an open invitation. I think we had 7 families that showed up. Well received. We heard their concerns. Some of them we could address. Some of them are, more around added bureaucracy and what it means to their AUMs moving forward and to their public land allotments and assurances that we can't extend to them. And then there were some other questions just about third-party litigation, potential disease transmission. And then there was a conversation on suspended AUMs. We'd asked the BLM if there were any suspended AUMs in those allotments. We'd been told it was a mix-up. We'd been told that there wasn't, but in the original adjudication of those permits in the 1960s, to hear one of the landowners explain it, there was the AUMs were allotted to everybody, and then at that point they held back 12% to let it play out, see what effects it had on the rangeland, and then they could potentially, increase or decrease those AUMs moving forward. So it was their interpretation that those suspended AUMs were still on the books, even though they were never used. And then there were just some other concerns with the potential issues with future mining operations in the area. Nevada Gold Mines operates that Cortez complex in there with multiple different versions of expansion. kind of in the works, and they were just looking for assurances that these sheep wouldn't have negative effects on those planting efforts moving forward. I think that was it, unless you had any questions.
Anything else? Anything else, Mr. McNinch? Okay. Anybody, Commissioner Bourne?
Well, I'm not sure how far we want to dive into this before agenda item 13, but the actual release plan change. But I guess here we go. Will there be hold harmless agreements in place before the sheep release in the Cortez?
For the record, Alan Janae, yes, that is the goal.
There we go, sorry. Tamara Ranches, they were in opposition to the release, is that true?
Scott Roberts for the record. Yes. Initially, they had submitted their letters prior to us meeting with them in Pine Valley. I think they continue to be in opposition. I think that stance has softened. They're not trying to speak for them, but what we heard in multiple meetings in multiple venues and in that letter is they're worried about that added bureaucracy. They're having issues on the Dixie allotment with Lahontan cutthroat trout and working with the BLM, and they see parallels with the bighorn sheep, and they're worried about that moving forward. Yep.
And have you, how about Nevada Gold Mines? What is their stance right now?
I would say relatively neutral. They've been part of this process since the start. I think they're kind of in a fact-finding position and waiting to see how everything plays out also. And just backtracking a little bit to the cooperative agreements, like Alan said, we've talked to everybody and ran through what they're looking for in those cooperative agreements. We met with the closest permittee on Wednesday of this week to just have a sit down, run through all the details of the cooperative agreement, make sure that everything's in place, and then we're going to be finalizing that draft and moving forward. And so in theory, as long as everybody's okay with the agreement as is, I mean, we'll have those signed, relatively soon.
And I guess where I'm going with this is I am 100% in favor of the release, but I want to make sure as a commission and NDOW that we do not create a public relations nightmare for the next 30 years. Being from rural Nevada, I know that they will not forget easily, and I can't say that I blame them, so I just want to make sure those concerns are taken care of.
Thank you for the sentiment, Commissioner, and we're much the same. I think you can look back at the history of our agency, and I mean, we always try to be in agreement, and we're still working, and we've done a whole heck of a lot of work to, line things up to work with the landowners in this area. And I would say, as far as Nevada Gold Mines, who's probably one of the more associated landowners with this release because of their location and their land holdings on that southwest side of Cortez, is that theirs was a conditional support based on, they listed out, I think it was 3 or 4 different items that they were conditional to their support. And so we've kind of walked through that. Some of that was in relation to this conversation, the suspended AUMs, the evaluation of that. So again, BLM's kind of looking at the other three things. I think were all things that we could check the box on. And so we're still having these conversations. It's not over. BLM hasn't made a decision. We're going to continue to work with the landowners, continue to look at solutions. But also, I think one of the things we're looking into is trying to put together better maps. What I saw in much of the comment letters were very generalized statements about the occupation and use of the habitats, and to the point where, because of the lack of specifics, it's drawing closer associations. And we have expertise as biologists in how those sheep are going to use the mountain and how we predict them to use the mountain. And I think that'll add a lot of specificity to this conversation that'll help alleviate some concerns. So that's one of the tasks that we're looking into. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that. Anybody else, any other questions at this time or concerns? All right. Seeing none, knowing this is a action item, I will send it out for any public comment here in Las Vegas. So is there any public comment in Las Vegas, again, regarding agenda item number 12?
John Hyatt with the Clark County Cab. Our cab discussed this. We support it enthusiastically. We think it's both morally and economically the best course to take. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any other public comment here in Las Vegas? All right, seeing none, how about any public comment via Zoom? All right, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission for any further discussion, comments, questions, motion. We'll entertain all the above. Yes, Commissioner Walther.
Unless there's further discussion, I would make a motion to approve the $500,000 from the Heritage Account Principal Project funding for sheep capture and water hauling in southern Nevada.
All right, outstanding. So we have, all right, so we have a motion from Commissioner Walther. We have a second from Commissioner McNinch. And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, that motion carries and passes. Thank you. All right, we will move on to agenda item number 13, and this is the biennial big game release plan for fiscal year 2024 and 2025. This is an action item. This is amendment number 3, Game Division Administrator Sean Espinoza. The commission will review and may take action to approve an amendment to the department's biennial big game release plan for fiscal years 2024 and 2025.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Game Division Administrator Sean Espinoza for the record. Continuing on with the conversation for the Cortez Range, this amendment is fairly simple. One of the things that was pointed out to us in our meetings with Eureka County was the fact that our release plan had identified 20 to 25 animals in it. And when we came to the commission last year about this time, being that we would like to release 40 to 60 animals into the Cortez Range, we would like to make the amendment to up that amount to 40 to 60 for this particular hunt unit group.
All right. Any questions, concerns, comments for Mr. Espinoza regarding this item? All right. And again, I guess my only question, Mr. Espinoza, is, again, an approximate number. Could be less than that, but not to exceed 60 animals. Is that kind of what that?
That's correct, yes. And of course, you heard the presentation from Staff Specialist Joe Bennett earlier. It's likely that we'll come to you in May as well with a 4th amendment to this biennial big game release plan because of the additional release sites that will be necessary, particularly if things do not go as planned with respect to the Cortez Range and the NEPA compliance there. We're going to have additional outlets involved with that release plan.
Okay. All right, perfect. Again, any questions, comments at this time? All right, this is an action item, so seeing no additional questions at this time, I will send it out for any public comment here in Las Vegas. So if there's any public comment here in Las Vegas with regards to agenda item number 13.
John Hyatt for Clark County Cab. We support this amendment.
Thank you. All right, any other public comment here in Las Vegas? All right, seeing none, how about any public comment via Zoom? All right. I thought she's...
Mr. Chairman, Jim Cooney for the record. The Elko Cab's in favor of the amended release plan.
All right, thank you, Mr. Cooney. No additional public comment via Zoom. All right, so I'll bring it back to the commission for any further discussion, questions, motion. Vice Chair Young.
Thank you, Chair. I'll jump in there and make a motion if there's no further comment to approve agenda item number 13, the biennial big game release plan for fiscal years 2024, 2025, amendment number 3.
All right, perfect. We have a motion for approval on agenda item number 13 from Vice Chair Young. We have a second from Commissioner Walther. All those in favor with an aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, that motion carries. Thank you for that. All right, moving on to agenda item number 14. This is Gemini Solar Project Activities. This is informational. Southern Regional Biologist Dave Harawoski. I hope I said that right. Or I didn't. All right. I won't try again, Dave. A presentation will be provided on the biodiversity survey activities occurring at the Gemini Solar Project for small mammals and how these activities can be used to inform future solar projects across the state.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to you today. So my name is Dane Horowski, and I'm the biodiversity biologist here in Las Vegas, for the record. And today we're going to talk about the Gemini Solar Facility and some work I did with small mammals there in May of last year with my collaborator, Dr. Alice Carl. We're lagging just a little bit here. There we go. All right, so Gemini has come up a few times in some different commission meetings, and actually 2 years ago, we took a field trip out to the fence line of that site along Valley of Fire Highway. It was actually at that commission field trip that I exchanged some information with their environmental program manager, and that got the ball rolling on this project. So I'm going to go into just a little background on the solar facilities that we see in southern Nevada, along with a little background of Gemini. And I think that that background is important for what we found and our takeaways. So traditionally, construction methods of solar facilities in southern Nevada have used a blade and grade or disc and roll method. And that involves kind of blading the topography and vegetation into a flat, compact surface, devoid of all, or at least most vegetation. Typically, these are in the 2,000 to 3,000 acre range. More recently, we've had proposals for sites that want to utilize mowing as a form of their vegetation management strategy, and these have been in the 3,000 to 4,000 acre range. This site is outside of Pahrump. You can see we still have some yucca and some creosote left under the panels. The brown grass is there. That's likely a combination of non-native schismus and brome. And then there's Gemini, and Gemini is kind of in a category off to itself right now. It was developed by a company called Primergy and operated and managed by NovaSource. Originally, it was proposed to be a little over 7,000 acres, and Primergy opted to use some novel approaches to reduce the landscape impacts for this site. And this is the view from the fence line on the Valley of Fire Highway, pretty close to where our field trip was a couple years ago. And I always like to put these sites side by side because I think the photos show a lot more than what I'm able to articulate. So Gemini, located 30 miles north of Las Vegas as you take I-15 towards Arizona. And this is the greater Dry Lake Valley area. There's a number of other solar facilities in that valley, and those are all built using that traditional blade and grade method. And Gemini is there in that yellow box. So historically, when a solar facility comes in, they put down their perimeter fence, and desert tortoises, along with any other wildlife that can't make it through a chain link fence, is excluded from the site. And tortoises on the inside of that facility then are relocated to a predetermined translocation area. But when Gemini was proposed in 2017, there was no tortoise translocation area available for them. So my collaborator on this project, Dr. Alice Carl, and others urged that if as much vegetation was left as possible throughout the planning and construction and operation phases, then it may be possible for tortoises to be reintroduced to the site. And BLM and Primergy really adopted this concept and ensured that strict guidelines were followed throughout all the processes, the planning through the operation. And I think that is one of the most important bullet points in this presentation today, is that initial buy-in from those parties early on is the reason why Gemini looks the way it does today. To implement their plan, panel rows were spaced farther apart, so they're about 9 or 10 meters apart compared to the typical 6 to 7 meters, and this allowed for more vegetation to be preserved between the panel rows. And the panels themselves are bifaced, so they capture energy from the underside as well as from the top. And this allowed the facility to meet their energy needs, their target goals, while reducing the need to build additional array blocks. During construction, equipment traveled in every other row, so this reduced the amount of travel routes throughout the facility and therefore the amount of crushed and destroyed vegetation. And then the rows themselves were assembled efficiently. They even developed a custom trailer to carry all the equipment they needed in a single pass. And so this reduced excess trips back and forth and reduced soil compaction. So here we are driving into the facility on the main road. You see we have a row with a lot more vegetation followed by a row with less vegetation. So a non-travel row followed by a travel or construction row. In addition to the vegetation, drainages were also left largely intact. This helped the facility in a few ways. One, just dealing with normal precipitation and our monsoons. They allowed the natural drainages to deal with that rather than blading and creating their own. Drainages are also important in the Mojave, important travel corridors for a number of species. They're important for reproduction for some things like some lizard species. And we just tend to find greater species diversity in and around those drainages and washes than we do just a little outside in the flat creosote scrub. So you can see that the facility avoided some of these major drainages altogether. And the smaller ones, if you look through these solar panels in the image, you can see those dark veins running through the facility. Those are smaller drainages that were built over top of and left intact. So Primergy also utilized less impactful methods than what they were actually authorized to use by the BLM, and some areas were just outright not developed. So on the left here is a map from the NEPA Record of Decision document, and on the right is a satellite image for what was actually implemented. So some areas were omitted from the project footprint. They were deemed unnecessary and just are not included in the facility. There are additional areas, including more than what are circled there, that are technically within the project footprint, but they were left untouched, again, deemed unnecessary for the facility to meet their energy goals. In the Record of Decision map, those horizontal lines are areas that originally were going to get mowed at 24 inches, and the diagonal lines are areas that were to get that traditional blade and grade treatment. But in reality, Gemini and Primergy determined that they didn't need to utilize either of those methods building over top of the vegetation and the landscape rather than kind of fighting against it. And there are still some areas that did need to be bladed for roads or battery storage sites. They can still trim vegetation if it's going to interfere with equipment, but that's very limited. So when all these minimization methods were implemented, the site was left with a maximized amount of vegetation remaining. They also increased the likelihood of plant recovery through that reduced soil compaction. All at the same time, the overall project footprint was decreased by roughly 30%, from over 7,000 acres to under 5,000 as of the time that array construction was completed in October of '23. So inside the site, there's some monitoring going on. Abiotic variables are measured by USGS. There's some different plant work occurring from contractors on site. Desert tortoises have their own dedicated crew monitoring them. But other than that, there hasn't been a lot of work at solar facilities in general, especially not in Nevada, and really nothing I can find for a site like Gemini. So that's where we came in. So we wanted to explore the response of wildlife to a facility that was built like Gemini. And these methods are loosely based on some work that my Tonopah counterpart did at the Crescent Dunes concentrated solar facility up there. And small mammals are a really great taxon to monitor. They're a key prey species for a number of predators. So an important link in that food chain for raptors, some reptiles, and other mammals. They're relatively easy to capture, have short generation time, so hopefully we see that population response a little sooner than other longer-lived and slower reproducing species. They're seed dispersers and burrow constructors, and those last 2 points make them what we call ecosystem engineers. So their microhabitat modifications are utilized by a number of other species, including things like desert tortoise hatchlings, which will utilize a rodent burrow like this as a thermal refugia to escape the harsh Mojave conditions. So our trapping methods included selecting 4 pairs of sites. Each consisted of a panel site inside of the solar arrays and a control site outside of the arrays. These were distributed north to south across the largest block in the facility. That captured some minor soil and vegetation differences, but for the most part, slope aspect and hydrology were all very similar. Each site consisted of 2 parallel transects of 25 traps apiece, and traps were spaced 12 meters apart, and this resulted in one trap being directly under a solar panel, while the next trap would be sort of in the open in between rows. So on the right here, we have Block B, that largest block in the facility. That's where most of the historic desert tortoise activity was and where most of the tortoises were reintroduced. All those black dots are individual trap locations. You can see the control sites on the outside of the facility and the panel sites there on the inside. We used 9 and 12-inch Sherman traps, and these are standard for small mammal work, baited with rolled oats, peanut butter, and birdseed. We open them in the evening after the heat of the day, and then check them shortly after dawn, at which time we close them. We trapped from May 12th to May 17th of last year. 3 pairs of sites were trapped for 3 nights. 1 pair of sites was trapped for 2 nights, and that was just based on our collaborators' staffing availability. So at our control sites, outside of the solar panels, we captured 11 unique individuals. All were Merriam's kangaroo rats, all were adults, and 10 of 11 were reproductive. On the inside, we caught 7 unique individuals from 3 different species, 5 adults, 2 subadults, with the majority being reproductive. So we ended up with 1,084 trap nights, and we used that along with the number of individual captures to determine a trap success. And usually this includes recaptures, but I chose to omit that. Anytime you have a baited trap, you get some individuals that learn where to get a free meal and a cotton ball bed for the night, and I didn't want one site with a lot of those influencing our results here. So we looked at just unique individuals. At the control panels, at the control sites, we had a 2% trap success, and at the panel sites, we had 1.3%. In the small mammal world, this is pretty low trap success. But It's not far from what we expect in this type of habitat. So this is rather monotypic. With the creosote scrub, there's not a ton of different habitat features. It's still important to a variety of species, but this is pretty similar to what we saw at very similar habitat outside Pahrump in October of 2022 with 1.6% trap success. And in April of 23, in more diverse habitat in Amargosa Valley, we saw 2.8%. So basically, we're not far off from what we'd expect. Hopefully with some more time, some more captures, we can actually start to run some statistics on this. This is the distribution of those captures in the facility. Only one site, that farthest south panel site, did not have any captures, but that was the pair that was only trapped for 2 nights. Overall, we were pretty happy with what we found living inside of the solar panels. And I was equally as excited about the incidental observations that we documented. So as we're driving or walking to or from our sites, we just took a GPS point of everything, any vertebrate that we saw. So reptiles, desert tortoise sign throughout, lots of whiptails, desert horn lizards, and had a rattlesnake reported to us while we were there. Mammals, black-tailed jackrabbits in and out of the site, and kit fox, quite a few, and a lot of our traps had a nice kit fox scat waiting on it for us in the morning when we went to check. In the very center of the facility, we did see an unknown passerine, but unfortunately it took off before we could ID it. It was not a raven, so I still consider that a win. And then insects, by no means an insect guy, but there were multiple butterfly species, other pollinators, and some other insects present. The creosote was in full bloom, so as you're walking through the sites, the butterflies would be kicking up. It was pretty cool. This is the distribution of those incidental observations. Again, we weren't actively surveying for any of these. We just documented what we saw. And we're pretty happy with that variety. So at the end of the week, we ended up with multiple taxa present under the solar panels, representing both predator and prey species. We have evidence of small mammal reproduction, and we have abundant flowering plants and pollinators. So it's still early in this process for Gemini, but it appears that the facility may still offer some ecosystem benefits to some species despite the anthropogenic disturbance. And this is important because if some species can persist throughout construction or recolonize a site afterwards, then perhaps we can maintain some connectivity throughout our valleys in the Mojave. And a solar facility doesn't necessarily need to be a disturbance or a disruption to genetic flow and movement. Additionally, these solar sites tend to have a 30 to 50-year lease, though we fully expect those to be rolled into extensions or whatever solar technology looks like in 2075. But I think there's little doubt that a site like Gemini is going to have greater restoration potential than a site that's aggressively mowed or bladed. So as we're walking through one of these rows here, we have the creosote in full bloom, stepping over small mammal burrows. It doesn't look like a lot of weed activity on the ground. There's a cacti I'm about to step over to. So Gemini kind of would already have a head start on that restoration when that time comes. So this was a small effort, and we still have a lot of remaining questions, like can Gemini actually be a sink to some species where they go in but don't thrive? So the extensive desert tortoise monitoring that's occurring should at least tell us if that's the case for tortoises, but a lot of other species, in fact, pretty much every other species in the Mojave does not get that amount of attention. And as the sun moves throughout the day, these solar panels track it. So every once in a while you're out there and all of them in unison rotate a few degrees, and this creates a bit of noise and vibration, and we're wondering what impacts that may have on fossorial wildlife or species that live underground. Can species that have evolved to this rather open desert dotted by creosote learn to tolerate an artificial canopy of solar panels? And our volant species, birds and bats, a lot harder to monitor at a site like this. Can they use it to safely hunt and forage? And we hope to start chipping away at some of these questions. Even in the spring of this year, we want to do some more trapping, include some sites farther away as a even better control. I'd like to pair these with some non-invasive survey methods, basically these specialized camera traps. It would be nice to find a passive way to monitor in a site like this that's logistically hard to work in and around. While I'm out there, I hope to put out some ultrasonic recorders for bats or bat detectors, as well as some acoustic recorders for birds, and see if we can't add some volant species to that list of what we find inside the facility. And ideally, we'd like to conduct similar work at those bladed and mowed facilities and do a nice comparison of those different construction methods. So some takeaways. These are all solar array projects in the state that were proposed in development or in construction or operation as of July of last year. And this is a very fast-moving industry. Things change a lot, so some of this is already out of date. But it doesn't include the battery storage sites, the transmission lines that are needed to move energy from place to place, the proposed wind projects, or the associated mining. And you can see that Esmeralda, Nye, and Clark counties down here are especially potentially impacted. And when a 3,000 to 4,000 acre facility comes in, there will be landscape impacts regardless of the construction method. But when it's co-located with a bunch of others, that 3,000 to 4,000 acres quickly becomes 50,000 to 60,000 acres. Maybe co-located because of a nice big transmission line or just a particularly sunny valley. But we're seeing something like this in these valleys as well as up in the Tonopah area with a complex of 7 facilities projected to be in the 60,000 acre range. But to wildlife, 60,000 acres built like Gemini likely looks a lot different in terms of connectivity than 60,000 acres that is aggressively mowed or bladed. So whether it's desert tortoise like this guy right along the Valley of Fire Highway, or razorback sucker, or bighorn sheep, there's this common theme down here in the Mojave with our wildlife, and it's their resiliency. But their habitat can be fragile. So as land and wildlife managers and project proponents, we need to keep utilizing innovative techniques and exploring creative strategies to reduce the landscape impacts where we can. It's still early in the Gemini process, but it appears like it's showing us that there may be a logical compromise between renewable energy development and native species conservation. So I'm going to leave you with this guy here. That's the Gemini fence in the background. It's raised about 8 inches so he can move freely back and forth. This was right near one of our trap lines. It was cool to find him in his burrow. But I want to thank my collaborator, Alice Carl, a biologist at BLM that gave me a hand, and the folks at Primergy and NovaSource for allowing me access.
Wonderful.
And I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
All right, wonderful. Thank you for that presentation. Any questions, concerns, comments from the commission? Yes, Commissioner McNinch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dane, that's really kind of hopeful, you know, considering where we're at these days. You kind of answered one of my questions right at the end. So just to verify, that fence is up 8 inches. The whole perimeter fence is?
Correct, and thank you for the question, Dane Horowski, for the record. Along most of it, along Valley of Fire Highway, it is not, which is probably a good thing since roadkill for tortoises is an issue. But around a lot of the perimeter, it is raised, I think at least 8 inches. But remember that they're working with the topography, so there are areas that, thankfully for me, because I had to get under it, I was had a little more room climbing under in a wash or so.
Okay, well, that's interesting. That's good.
All right, any other questions from the commission? Yes, Commissioner Bourne.
Thank you for the presentation. Will this type of construction be put into the conductivity plan? How will that work? As far as a recommendation for construction?
Thank you for the question, Alan Janae. I would offer that that's a possibility, that we could include something like this. I don't know that we have fully fleshed out down to this level yet, but that is a concept. So appreciate the thought.
All right, perfect. One question that I had, and that is with Gemini and working with them, do they have other projects that are coming online that you're aware of that they plan on doing this very similar design with, or?
Thank you for the question, Chair Rogers, Dane Harowski for the record. I am not certain if Primergy, what they have planned for in terms of other facilities. And I'll defer to my administrator, Jasmine, for that.
Thank you for the question, Jasmine Kleiber, for the record. The short answer is yes. In fact, we're seeing 2 projects that they've been proposing up north at this time that are near the Mason Valley Wildlife Management Area. They're currently exploring what kind of opportunities. It's a very different type of habitat than what Gemini Solar is located in, and so we are working with them to try to incorporate these kind of construction methods across the state. In fact, that's really coming down to some coordination with BLM and trying to make these kinds of methods standard across solar facilities in the state. So the answer is yes, and we are still trying to get that expanded.
Wonderful, thank you. Anything else from the commission? All right, seeing none, thank you very much. Appreciate the presentation. All right, moving on to agenda item number 15. This is public comment period, informational. Public comment period will be limited to 3 minutes. No action can be taken by the commission at this time. Any item requiring commission action may be scheduled on a future commission agenda. Persons making comments are asked to begin by stating their name for the record. Any public comment here in Las Vegas? All right, seeing none, how about any public comment on Zoom? Seeing none, okay. We are on to agenda item number 16, and again, this is our tour. And as Director Janae mentioned at the beginning of the meeting today, we will be leaving out of here and not returning back to this location, or I should say department vehicles will not be returning back to this location. And if there isn't, Director Janae, do you want to? Yeah.
So, given that we are at 2:35, we always come with options for the commission. And so I will offer up, our original proposed route was a 3-hour loop without discussion. It was going up I-15 to Valley of Fire exit, driving by this Gemini Solar. We've stopped there before, but it would possibly be a refresher for you. We would drive over to Valley of Fire, go to Beehive, have a discussion about water, the desert bighorn sheep reality that we're facing down here in southern Nevada, wrap up that conversation, drive along North Shore Road, come back down to Lake Las Vegas. We'll have a site there where we'll pull off and talk about urban wildlife conflicts, specifically coyotes and feeding of coyotes in Las Vegas. Talk about that, and then leave there and go back to the Silverton Hotel. And that is the full 3-hour loop without the timelines on discussion. The 2-hour loop would be leaving here, going East Lake over to the North Shore intersection, pulling off a little bit up on North Shore Overlook, pulling over there, looking back north towards the Muddies, have that discussion about the Muddies, bighorn sheep, the emergency water hauls, and the translocation, and then turning around and going right back to the same Lake of Las Vegas conversation for coyotes, finishing up there, and then going back to the Silverton Hotel. So the options we're providing you is 2-hour loop without talking, or a 3-hour loop without talking, giving it, knowing that it's 2:35.
All right, thank you for the options. Anyone from the commission? Anybody that's, Commissioner McNinch, did you have a?
I'm good with the 3. We're here for a reason.
All right,
I'm good with 3 hour.
easy enough. Commissioner Walter, Commissioner Boren, everybody good? All right, for those of us old enough that remember Gilligan's Island and that 3-hour tour, hopefully this fares better. No, that's great, so we'll go with that.
Okay,
And the
so-
meeting stands,
You bet. I just want to give notice to any public that are wishing to attend. As I mentioned, we'll go north on I-15, leaving here. We'll go into Valley of Fire. We'll go to the Beehive campground area, and that's where we'll have our first stop. And then once we do that talk, then we'll give you directions to the next location from there. So, thank
outstanding.
you much. We'll leave here from the parking lot, hopefully 10 minutes.
You got it. All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody.